The sky had not been blue in years. When I was a child, blue was taken for granted, a polite backdrop to everything that happened beneath it. Now the sky is a bruise, copper, ash gray, a permanent scorch that never cools. Sunlight comes through like a threat, filtered and angry. The heat folds the horizon inward until buildings lean into themselves like tired animals. The collapse came slow, and then it came all at once. Rivers that used to sing through towns are memory lines in cracked earth. Where there were wetlands, there are salt flats that shimmer with heat mirages. Where there were forests, there are blackened skeletons, their trunks scarred by fires that never seem to stop. The seasons have stopped behaving. Winters arrive with storms that peel roofs off like lids. Summers last for years and bake whatever life was left out of the soil. Cities, those monuments to being many, look like abandoned sets. Steel ribs jut from crumpled concrete. Malls, once places of light and sound, sit with their glass mouths broken, mannequins still frozen mid-pose. A highway that used to be an artery now runs like a fossil, every car a tombstone rusting in place. The landmark I remember best, an old clock tower downtown that used to mark our lateness and our patience, leans like a sentence unfinished. Its hands are gone. Time, for the living, keeps to its own pulse now. Hunger, thirst, guard shifts, generator hum. Water has become religion. I cannot overstate that. People used to take showers, then showers became indulgences, then a rumor of a spring turned into a pilgrimage, then the pilgrimage became a war. Wells are guarded like altars. Rain, when it comes, is not mercy but a test, acidic, tainted with runoff, with the metallic tang of melted infrastructure. When the sky decides to give us water, it also gives us new dangers, and so we measure our trust as carefully as we measure our cups. Institutions that once promised order are either quieted or violent. The government that used to speak from polished cameras now whispers in pockets and splinters into factions. Some of them still wear uniforms and call themselves the state, but their reach is a fistful of territory. Water depots, makeshift air filtration plants, whatever they can hold. The hospitals are museums of absence. Corridors that led somewhere now lead to locked doors and the ghosts of ventilators. Schools double as barracks. Banks are barns of paper and ash. Mailboxes are monuments to a communication system we stopped using. The radio towers are a peculiar exception. Some of them still breathe. They carry voices, mine included, because words travel farther than supplies. Survivor groups have formed like lichens on rock, small, hardy, territorial. Some are cooperative, trading seeds, traded repairs, the small economies of repairmen and storytellers. Others are predatory, raiders who know how to move at night and how to read hunger in a man's step. There are the scavengers, people who have turned rummaging into an art, whose backpacks rattle with the relics of other lives. There are the settlers, who try to make towns that last, stacking up walls and hope in equal measure. There are efficients who worship the generators and technicians who have become priests of circuitry. And there are the quiet ones, people who refuse to join anything and survive by a discipline that resembles feral prayer. Trade exists, but it is transactional and brutal. Food for water, medicine for salvaged batteries, a favor for a passage through a checkpoint. Old currencies are jokes now. Paper money curls in drawers like leaves. Value is measured in grains, in liters, in the skill to fix a pump, in the patience to listen to an old man tell you where water might hide beneath cracked pipes. The landscape has learned to be dangerous in new ways. Gravity has become a rumor on the wind, not in the scientific sense so much as in the stories folks tell by the fire. Strange anomalies, things that fell sideways, an elevator frozen mid-drop. Whether those stories are true or superstition doesn't change that people move differently now. With caution, with the expectation that the world might betray the predictable. Dust devils come with teeth. Microbursts take roofs like paper. The very ground can betray you where a sinkhole opens and swallows a market stall overnight. Noise has its own geography. There is the constant low hum of the generators that keep radios alive, the staccato chatter of handhelds at checkpoints, the sudden crack of a flare when a group signals for help or for a raid. Between these sounds, there is also a raw, private silence. It's the kind that presses against your eardrums when you reach an empty intersection and realize that no one has walked that way in months. That silence carries memories of laughter, of arguments, of dinners that were once ordinary. We have learned to recognize what remains human by the small things: a garden made from plastic bottles, a child's drawing nailed to a shelter wall, someone leaving water in a public place with a note that says, "For anyone." Those gestures are fragile, but they anchor us more than any barricade. They say someone else is thinking beyond the next ration. Every map I own is ink and grief. Names have been replaced with descriptions: the broken bridge, the tower with no face, the market that smells like oranges and rot. You learn to read people the way you read maps. When a person smiles too quickly, when they keep their hands where you can see them, when they ask more than they give, you notice. Trust is currency we cannot issue freely. And always, somewhere on the periphery, there is a crackle on the radio. A voice, distorted but alive. Another human claiming the air for themselves. That flicker of signal is why I keep the generator running. It is why I speak, to stitch a line through the distance, to remind whoever is listening that the world is broken but not completely unspeaking. The landscape is merciless. The institutions are ghosts and beasts. The future is something we whisper about because we are afraid to shout. Still we wake. Still we move. And for now, that is enough. I am the voice that comes through the static at midnight. I am the hum that keeps the old transmitter awake when the rest of the world wants to sleep and forget. My name is Miles Harrington, or at least it used to be. Names change out here. They're traded for usefulness and safety. People call me Radio Now, or Voice, or the one who marks time between the generator's coughs. Saying my name aloud feels like admitting I existed before the maps turned to lists of ruins. It is both comfort and compass. Before everything cracked, I was an electrician in a city that smelled like coffee and asphalt. I fixed lights, rewired apartments, rewired my own life without thinking much about the appliance boxes that held people's afternoons. When the rain stopped behaving and the first ration lines lengthened into something ugly, I kept fixing. That, my hands, my tools, was what saved me at first. Later, when noise turned into danger and walking past a gas station meant risking a bullet, those same hands learned to coax life back into a dead generator, to splice battery leads with a patience that felt holy, to jury-rig antenna mounts out of I-beams and rusted bicycle frames. I learned which capacitors would hold under heat, and which would simply melt into a bulb of useless glue. I learned how to read the language of electrical hums like others read faces. Survival here is half engineering and half stubborn routine. I tend the generator like a garden. Its oil level is checked at dawn. Fuel is a currency measured in teaspoons. I carry a small toolkit that smells like metal and antiseptic. Wire strippers, a roll of solder, a rag stained with coolant. I have a rain catcher made from cut tarps and an old culvert pipe, leading to a barrel lined with cloth and charcoal. I boil what I can and then run it through the charcoal. I keep packets of powdered iodine folded into a waterproof envelope, not because I trust them, but because they've saved more lives than doctrine ever did. Solar plates sit on a broken roof, angled by rope and hope. They never give everything we ask of them, but they give enough for the radio and a dim lamp at night. Food is a ledger of favors and memories. I barter signal time for seeds, mending for meat, radio repairs for a jar of pickled beans. I keep my rations measured in small, dull spoons. I know which roots are edible and which will make you forget your name for a fevered day. I know how to treat a wound with boiled cloth and pressure before it becomes a death sentence. I have weekly learned to grow things. A line of lettuce in inverted bottles, beans in a tub that used to hold something luxurious like detergent. Gardening out here is an act of defiance and of humility. Plants remind us that life can be patient, but survival isn't just a list of tasks. It is a calculus of trust. I carry a memory of people I loved. A woman named Sarah with hands that could make a pot of soup taste like an argument was a thing that could be solved. And a boy who could count to 30 and then start over, because the numbers felt better that way. I go through their photographs like relics, tucking them behind the radio's power supply where the heat is steady. Their faces look back at me, small, stubborn proof that I was more than a fixture in a city of fixtures. They are gone. A fever took Sarah in a night that smelled of bleach and hospital lights without electricity. The boy, my brother, walked out one dawn with a backpack and a map someone had drawn with sweat and ink, and never came back. Sometimes I imagine him learning to whistle with crows somewhere. Loss writes itself into habits. I wake now at the hour when the city used to sound alive and listen, instead for the particular kinds of silence that mean someone has fled or been taken. I notice footprints that are too fresh or canned goods that are missing from communal stores. I flinch at the sound of engines, because engines usually mean someone is arriving with a plan that includes taking more than giving. I have learned to sleep with a knife within reach, and to keep my radio tuned low while my body tries to forget the rest. Why keep going? For a while it was empty duty because the muscles still moved and not because there was anyone to move for. Then the radio changed things. Voices find you out here. You speak and someone replies. You tell a story and a stranger laughs where no laughter seemed possible. I had a generator and an antenna. Someone had a cracked bell of an old broadcast license in a drawer. It took 3 weeks of coaxing and bartered battery packs before my signal carried past a ruined block of tenements and into a valley where people still gathered at night to listen, pressing their ears to the shortwave like confessions. Responsibility arrived as a weight. When one person told me, hoarse with thirst and trembling, that they had stolen water because their child could not swallow dust, it became more than my duty to keep the transmitter limping along. My voice could be a way to coordinate, to warn, to comfort. I learned to read the cadence of callers, the ones who were bluffing strength and the ones who were too tired to lie. I learned how to give directions without giving away resources, a code of safe phrases that point people to clean springs without broadcasting their location to raiders. I became a node in a fragile chain of trust. People send me lists and requests. Sometimes they send warnings of patrols and of bad weather. A voice on the radio is safer than a face at a checkpoint. Sometimes the radio demands cruelty. You take calls and you triage. You cannot help everyone. There are nights I hung up on a voice that sounded like mine, sister, brother, neighbor, because answering would have meant revealing a cache of fuel. Those decisions are small murders you teach yourself to live with. They hollow you in ways that surgery never does. I keep a ledger, not of guilt but of facts, who I refused, who found another way. The ledger is ink and regret. There is also beauty in the work. I have watched a woman teach 100 children to count in a courtyard lit by a single bulb I powered with a donated battery. I have listened to a man play a violin he taped together. The notes were thin like paper, but they were notes. Once a group of migrants sent a basket of dried figs with a note that said simply, "For the voice." Little things like that stitch us back together. They are proof that the human signal can survive static. I have alliances and enemies in equal measure. The settlers trade me water if I keep the local pump's control board functional. The scavengers sometimes bring me news that is worth more than food. Maps of safe routes. Rumors of a working hospital in a city 3 days north. The efficients will allow my transmitter to point its beam through their territory if I play their music once a week, because music is a currency of spirit. I learned the language of deals, the names of people who mattered, the hours when gates closed, the small kindnesses that opened doors. Yet, beyond the barter, it is connection that keeps me. There is a truth that surfaces after the ground has changed its mind a few times. Humans are made to speak and be heard. My transmissions are not always useful. Sometimes I read the weather and nothing happens. Sometimes a voice calls and says, "Thank you for being there," and then hangs up. That thank you is grease for the gears. It keeps the generator wheeling, the circuits cool, the lids on the barrels sealed. I have altered because of this world. I am softer around certain things and harder in others. I cry when a child learns to read from a tattered textbook. I sleep light because nightmares have been good teachers. My hands show the work. Small scars, calluses, a burn I earned in the early days when we tried to bag diesel on a rooftop under shelling. The aches remind me of the life I intend to continue living. They are the geography of my persistence. There are nights when hope feels like a cheap lamp that will burn out at dawn. But then, at 2 in the morning, when the generator is purring in a rhythm that feels like a heart, a voice crackles through from a campsite miles away. Someone laughs about a dog that stole a boot. Someone tells me a recipe for stewed lentils that sounds like happiness. Someone else sings a fragment of an old radio show we used to love. I write these things down on a scrap of cardboard and tape it behind the transmitter. The cardboard is a cathedral of small mercies. So I keep the beam going. I keep my name in the world by refusing to let the frequencies die. I fix what I can and I lend my voice where it is needed. I sleep in shifts, wake to check the barrel, the antenna tension, the batteries. I polish the microphone with a handkerchief that smells like rain that fell years ago. This is the life of the radio man, minimal and enormous at the same time. If someone asks me what I hope for, I would say something simple and ridiculous. That my brother whistles with the crows and thinks of me sometimes. That Sarah's laugh is still a thing in a place I cannot see. That a child who hears me tonight will grow up to know the world before the bruise of the sky. Mostly, I hope that someone somewhere will answer the radio not with a plea but with a plan. A plan that includes more water than violence, more seeds than scavenged metal. Until then, there is the hum, the static, the small patch of warm light over a circuit board. There are the soft, stubborn acts of keeping a conversation alive. I speak because to stop would be to concede silence, and silence is how the last of us disappear. I have survived long enough to know that survival is not just about filling a belly or mending a wire. It is about giving someone the chance to hear their name spoken back to them. That is why I keep talking. They called it a glitch at first, like a bad line on a phone. A thing you could laugh about afterward over a bowl of soup and a shared cigarette. Did you feel that? The world hiccuped. Then the hiccups got louder and they stopped being funny. The crisis that carved the map of our days has 2 faces. The first is the slow, patient violence you already know, drought that eats soil like moths eat wool, wildfires that redraw the horizon, the seasons that forgot how to be gentle. That was the long knife. The second is the thing that makes people speak in hushed tones near the transmitter, the gravity glitches. Those are the short, sharp disasters that arrive without meteorological courtesy and ruin you whether you planned or not. I've tried to explain the glitches on air, in plain sentences between songs and static, because people want to hear something that sounds like an explanation, even if it's only a net you weave to catch your own fear. So here's what I say now, with my tools cooling in their foam case, and a map of routes pinned to a plywood wall. Imagine the ground as a stage and gravity as the director. When the director coughs, the props fall in ways no one expects. Things that should be heavy float. Things that should sit solidly begin to slip and sink. Cars, beams, crates, bodies, none of it obeys habit. The glitches come in patterns we did not have words for before. Sometimes the pull slackens in concentric circles. A truck on the edge of a sinkhole will rise a little, creep sideways, and then fall into nothingness when the pull returns. Other times a patch of earth sags like the skin of a drum being played from far below. A market square will open and swallow piles of crates, and the people that thought it was safe. Occasionally there are increases in pull that's worse for structures, because the weight becomes sudden and crushing. Roofs collapse, scaffolding groans. The human body takes damage in new ways when the floor drags you through it. People call them glitches because that is easier than calling them what they might be. The planet rearranging itself. My own rough, radio-friendly theory, the one I read aloud slow and careful so listeners don't panic, is a mix of things. Years of drought have sucked the water out of aquifers that once steadied the crust. Rivers dried and something beneath the soil shifted. Colossal masses of frozen or fluid material moved. Add in the heat-laden expansion of air, the rise and fall of massive wildfires disturbing soils, the collapse of underground tunnels and old mining voids, and you get a landscape that no longer promises the same pull from one step to the next. Call it subsidence, call it crustal readjustment, call it, if you like, the earth bowling loose. Scientific words make people feel safer, even when they're incomplete. Whatever name you give it, the effect is practical and brutal. When the ground gives, it takes resources with it. Wells collapse into new caverns. Pumps that hummed once now spin uselessly above a void. Buried water piping is shredded like string. Field terraces that once held crops slide into cracks. The glitches have turned places we once relied on into traps. That's the immediate, visible toll. The hidden toll is in how people behave afterward: suspicion, hoarding, withdrawal. In a world already starving for trust, the glitches pried apart the last duct tape. Our community, a handful of houses clustered by an old radio tower and one stubborn well, felt the crisis as a personal attack. The first glitch to hit us was the kind that creeps. A weekday evening when the sky was a bruised light and we had just finished a meal. The ground tilting was like the lurch of a ship. A barn door swung open and slammed shut in slow motion. Our main water barrel, anchored with ropes, leaned and then vanished as the patched concrete slab beneath it folded like a blanket. We watched people clutch at buckets and watched the surface of the well bubble and then go silent. Later, after we recovered what we could and dug the edges away by flashlight, we found a void below the concrete, a pocket where soil had washed away in earlier seasons. A sinkhole had quietly been forming beneath our feet for months. That's when you learn the difference between luck and planning. Encounters with other survivors have become harder because the glitches change the calculus of movement. A route that was safe on Tuesday can be a death trap on Thursday. The settlers with their makeshift walls and crop gullies showed us how to anchor beds and water barrels to bedrock where possible. They taught us to apply tension lines to anything that could float. Heavy wooden crosspieces lashed and driven to deeper ground with metal stakes. The kind of low-tech engineering that keeps a barrel from performing an aerial exit. The scavengers came by too afterward, eyes darting for anything that sparkled. The brass of a coupling, a jar of distilled water, a functioning pressure valve. Those exchanges were usually fair because the scavengers know the price of a ruined engine and often had skill to offer in return. A patch for a generator, a scavenged solar cell, a strip of rebar. Then there are the raiders. Where the glitches create chaos, predators learn to exploit the confusion. We had a night where a glitch knocked lights out across 3 towns. In the blackout, a band moved along the ridge, clean and practiced, taking advantage of shadows and collapsed fences. They hit a water cache we had been hiding behind a false wall. Someone in the camp let loose a flare to the east. That saved a child who had strayed into a fissure, but it also painted us to the raiders like a target. We lost 3 barrels that night, and a man named Lewis who went out to bargain and never returned. Raoul, one of our watchmen, still hums the tune of the flare in the mornings like a prayer. Why is survival getting harder every day? Because layered disasters compound. The drought starves the roots that once held the soil, making the land more prone to collapse. The heat weakens the infrastructure we still rely on. Plastic becomes brittle, rubber cracked, seals leak. Fires torch what little vegetative cover that could have shielded soil from erosion. Supply chains are fractured. Fuel is rarer, and the fuel we do have burns less clean after being looted and refiltered by desperate hands. Manufacturers are ghosts. Medical care is a rumor with an address 3 towns over that may or may not be true. Every loss of manpower, a healer, a mechanic, an elder who knows where an old spring hides, is an exponential reduction in resilience. Our resource picture is grim and specific. Water, intermittent, often contaminated and increasingly deep. Wells are now often dry or dangerous because their casings have shifted. Surface water is tainted with runoff from burned land and melted infrastructure. Food. We have gardens that survive because people tend them like vigil. Calories are often fortified by scavenged preserves and traded tins, but those are finite. Fuel, if you own fuel, you are both protected and marked. Batteries die. There are not enough cells to keep radios on continuously. Medicine. Antibiotics are rarer than stories of clean births. Seeds, precious. Every seed packet becomes a strategic asset. Tools, metal fatigue from heat and use. Spares are church relics. Shelter materials, scavenged and thin. Actionable advice has to live in the same sentence as alarm. I say these things on air because if I can save one person an unnecessary walk or a misstep, then a transmission has done its duty. Never walk across a surface you cannot visually verify. Look for hairline cracks, for tilted signposts, for the way puddles flow. If water moves oddly, sloshing in a pool while wind is calm, that is not a trick of light. It could be a subtle shift below. Birds can be guides. When flocks hold, they often know a safe corridor. When they scatter, do not follow where they scatter. Go the other way. When carrying heavy loads across uncertain ground, distribute the weight. Use shoulder straps, sling packs low, and travel in smaller groups across potentially unstable terrain. Avoid concentrated loading on wooden floors or bridges whose support you can't see. Test with a pole first. Anchor barrels and tanks to bedrock or deep posts. Strap them crosswise rather than relying on a single tie point. If you have to use a rooftop as storage, tether everything in multiple directions so that if the pole tilts, things won't become missiles. Build a simple early warning routine. We do reconnaissance walks twice a day now. A slow lap over fields and key paths to pick up the small things, a new fissure, a browning strip of vegetation that may indicate underground flow. Signaling nets are crucial. If you have a bore or old hand pump, mark it with 2 signs at a distance so that if the immediate area collapses, the markers remain and people can find the resource without stepping into a trap. Treat water as you would a hazardous substance until proved otherwise. Boil when possible, filter through cloth and charcoal, and if you have iodine tablets, keep them accessible. When in doubt, ration conservatively. Do not reveal caches unless you are certain that the people in need are part of a trusted network. Trust is not a moral failing here. It is practical triage. Conserve fuel and battery life. The radio runs short hours at higher power. Schedule call-ins and set times. Teach the community how to use a hand crank or pedal charger for small devices, and keep a ledger of battery usage. Rotate the heavy drain devices so no one device becomes a single point of failure shelter during extreme microbursts or glitch surges. Get into the interior of sturdy buildings, away from windows and tall, unsupported structures. If you must be outside and see ground begin to bulge or crack, move laterally to harder ground if you can. The fissure may lengthen in predictable ways. Avoid congregating on bridges and old paved crossings during times when the pattern suggests sudden pulls. Bridges can sag and then grab. Develop nonverbal codes for emergencies. The night the raiders moved, we learned that a single short whistle followed by a long one meant hide and not come. Codes save lives because they allow people to react without exposing caches. Teach children and new arrivals the codes. Repetition makes them muscle memory. But actionable advice is only half the work. The social mechanics of survival are just as important. The glitches make people hoarding prone. They create an economy of fear. You need rules that the community accepts. Rotation for watch duty so that fatigue doesn't make mistakes. Transparent logs for who takes what and why, So hoarding gets visible and accountable. Agreements on thresholds if the well drops below a certain mark. Create a ration plan rather than let panic decide. These aren't utopian ideas. They are the scaffolding of a town that refuses to cannibalize itself. There are moments where science and superstition cross. People left offerings at the edge of a new sinkhole, the way their grandparents might leave bread for the dead. It felt like a small human attempt to reconcile with a shifting world. I do not mock those rituals on air. If a charm calms 10 people enough to stop them raiding tonight, then the charm is useful even if it does nothing to the physics. The crisis forces choices that tear the inside of you. We faced one last week. A fissure opened along our main trail to the north, the one used to reach the settlers for seed trade. It split the soil for 300 meters and put a direct, glaring absence across our route. We could wait and risk our seed stores, or we could attempt a detour that would add 2 days of walking and put any children in danger because of exposure. I suggested building a temporary rope bridge across a narrower section, anchoring to bedrock and running a scout team ahead with a pole. Tomas, a man with more courage than patience, argued for a night crossing when the moon masked the signs. We argued until our voices were dry, and in the end we did both. We sent a scouting rope team by day and kept a watch by night. We lost 1 bag of seed to a sudden pull that took a pack in one man's foot. The man survived, but not without a scar he will carry like a coin. That choice to risk for others is what the crisis demands of you. It asks for sacrifices, for careful planning, for the willingness to be the one who stays with the transmitter while others go and come back with stories and goods. It asks you to read maps that are not only geographical but moral. So this is the crisis we live inside. A world made less predictable by heat and hunger, and then abruptly violent in the ways the glitches show. We cope by being small engineers, by setting codes and anchors, by listening to birds and the groan in an old pipe. We balance the ledger of human needs against the ledger of what holds ground. And when the glitches come, as they do, without warning, I light the transmitter and speak a little louder. I warn. I coax. I offer whatever practical voice I can, because in a place where the floor might betray you, knowing where to step can be the difference between a night by the radio and a story told in fragments to those you leave behind. The dust keeps getting into everything. It nests under fingernails. It finds the small seam where my shirt meets my neck. It tastes of old paper and metal. Lately it has tasted like the end of a sentence, like there's nowhere for us to go that does not begin with loss. Still we move. Still we plan. Still we argue at the edges of lamps. The well that supplies our cluster has been whispering its decline for weeks. The water level reads like a fever chart. Down. A shallow recovery after rain that proves false. Down again. We set out buckets and measured rations as if measurement itself could make the numbers honest. Rations riffle through hands like bad news. Beans, powdered milk, whatever canned meat we've managed to keep from the scavengers and the raiders, they are all counted and recounted. I keep the ledger for the camp because my handwriting is steady, and because I am, absurdly, good at knowing when a number is a lie. Twice this month, someone reported 6 loaves missing when there were only 3 to begin with. Someone else claimed a jar of iodine. We set a watch and found nothing but a muddy footprint and the whispered sound of someone running with shame. Fuel has become the other kind of blood. The generator takes it in teaspoons and spits out a life that keeps the transmitter alive. When the wind is right, the solar plates give us a small mercy. But in the deep heat they become trays of despair. Batteries go from full to dead in a few nights if you let them. We have learned to schedule transmissions like prayers. The radio runs heavy at first light, when the walk-ins bring what news they can. It runs again at dusk, when families gather and someone with a child's voice asks if it is safe to cross to Settlers Ridge. The rest of the day it sleeps with one eye open. I can hear the strain in the voices that come through. Tomas calls once a week to tell me he's found something we might trade, a coil of copper, a half-buried pump. And once in a while he comes himself with hands that tremble from a long walk. Marta tends the makeshift clinic and calls when the coughs start taking someone too early. Lewis's sister calls sometimes. Her voice has a softness that makes me remember softer things. We hold these threads like warmth, but the raiders have been pressing the map lately. They are not the ragged opportunists that used to come and take what was too easy to take. They have discipline now, and that makes them worse. They move in waves, an organized shadow pressing on the edges of towns whose people are already raw. They have scouts who know how to read a trail and how to know when the wind will hide the sound of boots. They have tools to cut through hinges and a cruelty that looks like business. Last month they set up a pattern of moving at odd hours that coincided with the glitches. They seem to have learned where fissures open and how to use that to their advantage. If a town moves to close a gate after a ground shift, the raiders time a strike for when the community is spread thin, responding to the next emergency. We had an early morning raid that looked like a return of every bad dream. The glitch came first, a tremor that rolled through the ground and through the wash of our solar plates like defeated hands. In the half-light that followed, the raiders moved in from the ridge with ropes and hooks, sliding over the edge like vultures. They took what they could: seeds, a cache of powdered milk, the last of our kerosene. They did not touch the radio, which I am grateful for in a way that tastes like steel. Perhaps they understand the value of speech in a way I do, or perhaps they were in a hurry that night. We lost food and fuel and a man named Raoul, who tried to bargain and spoke too boldly. He returned with a broken jaw and a hatred that made his eyes dangerous. He slept for a week and woke with a quiet you cannot mistake for recovery. When he looked at me after that, I felt like an animal that had been watched by a hunter and found still alive. The stakes keep rising because the world itself keeps changing, and because human appetite adapts cruelly fast. The glitches make movement itself riskier. The raids make staying riskier. The math of survival becomes a twisted equation with variables that do not behave. Water levels, seed viability, the proximity of raiders, the stability of a walking route. And somewhere in that math, a rumor began to run. Rumors are their own kind of currency. They travel on seams, a voice in a market, a child who proudly carries a scrap of paper, a scavenger who sings a tune to start a conversation. You learn to listen for the shape of a rumor, whether it's brittle or supple, whether it wants you to go somewhere or to hold something close. The rumor this time had a proper name, the greenhouse. At first, greenhouse sounded like a child's memory. People used to speak of greenhouses like other generations speak of mythic cars or birds. Now, in a place where a single lettuce is an act of heroism, the word had the weight of legend. The story went like this. Somewhere north, beyond the line the maps have given up on, there exists a place enclosed under glass and steel that keeps humidity and light in a controlled shape. Inside, there are rows of plants bathing in a technology few of us have seen for years. Hydroponic rigs, circulating water, maybe even a solar array that works well enough to power grow lights. The greenhouse, the rumor said, had a reserve of seed, of clean water, possibly of people who had learned how to coax the land back into being. Those kinds of stories make you do math you thought you'd left behind. Could such a place hold enough to help 100 or 1,000 people? Or was it tailored only to the slow curiosity of a small, guarded community that would shut its doors at the sight of outsiders? Did it really exist, or was it a trick planted by someone to draw folks out of their defenses? That last hypothesis is not theoretical. Desperate people set traps with myths like bait. A false hope is a way to thin a village. I kept the rumor on air like a test. I did not announce coordinates. I do not hand out hope like a cartographer handing out maps to mines. Instead, I read the shape of the rumor and asked callers if they had seen anything. Green panels, an odd fog in a valley, people moving with the surety of gardeners in places where gardeners should not be. Callers returned pieces of story. A woman at Settler's Ridge had found a plastic tag with a logo. A scavenger had seen a greenhouse frame 30 miles north. half buried under ash but with glass panes glinting. Tomas swore he heard of a man who had lived in a hospital with a team that tried to keep things running and who had plans to go north. The rumor widened and thinned at the same time. We argued at the council table. What was left of a council by then? More a lineup of people who volunteered to be loud enough to be heard. Some said go now, while the sun was cool and the glitches less active. Others said we were fools to risk the girls and the elders on a trek that might lead to a gated community of mercenaries. Marta said the clinic needed seeds and antibiotics badly. She pressed her hands into her sleeves and looked like a woman who could hold 1,000 small tragedies without drowning. Raoul wanted to send a raid-busting team to see if the raiders had learned the route to the rumored site and were using it as a base. Tomas wanted to build a pulley system that could span a new fissure because the old route had been broken. My own internal ledger was noisier. The radio is a safe place to be compassionate but cowardly. On air, I can say the careful things. If you must travel, go light. Watch for birds. Avoid known fissures. Do not go in a straight line. Off air, when I sit with the council and look at the faces of those who will be asked to leave behind babies in the keeping of others, I feel the friction between hope and the responsibility that keeps my hands clean enough to turn wrenches. If the greenhouse is real, it could change us. A place that grows could be a seed bank and a way to teach techniques that could be adapted elsewhere. If it is false, sending people will be a sacrament of the naive. We compromise the way small communities do. We would send a scouting team. Not the children, not the elders, not more than 3 people who are skilled enough to know a greenhouse from a tar-covered shed. Tomas volunteered first, with a grin that did not meet his eyes. He is young in the way that carries both courage and foolishness. He carries energy like an overfull cup. Raoul said he would go, but only to keep Tomas honest. I could not send people without being part of the plan. My voice had to be anchored to a body. I packed my toolkit and my hand-stitched maps, a spare microphone for the field, a canteen I had found with a dent. Marta drew the list of medications we could spare for the trip and pressed it into my hand. The morning we left was the kind of light that tricks you into thinking the world will behave. Birds made a clumsy pattern east to west. The air smelled of the distant salt of a river that had once been closer than it is now. We set out with the ritual nobody speaks of. We gave water to neighbors who could not leave. We marked the doors with a charcoal X that meant safe until return. And we cut a length of rope in 3 equal parts, an old superstition that is somehow comforting. We walked along the broken road that had been a highway and kept our eyes on the ground. The route changed as the maps had promised. We crossed a field whose soil had been hollowed out by subsidence, the crops half sunken. We moved around a fissure that had opened like a wound in the earth. At one point, a small farmhouse had tilted to one side so that its chimney pointed like a finger. Tomas joked and then stopped because no one could laugh properly for long. Raoul kept looking over his shoulder as if expecting an ambush. I listened to the radio pack on my back like an extra heartbeat. 2 days into the trek, we found signs. Not the greenhouse itself, but evidence that someone had been here recently. Footprints of a size and depth that suggested boots. A scrap of synthetic tarp with a stitching pattern I had seen once in a hospital tent. A glass shard polished enough to suggest repeated handling. At night we camped near a riverbed that whispered of a time when water ran freely. The stars in the night were less than what they used to be. The smoke from distant burns threw a veil over the sky that made it feel both smaller and more vast. On the 3rd day a glitch hit. It started like a sigh and then the ground bucked. We were crossing a bridge that had never been more than a rumor, a narrow span of metal and wood that creaked like a living thing. In the middle, the pull increased for a heartbeat, and we watched in a slow, horrible theater as the bridge sagged under a weight it didn't have, and a seam split along a rusty bolt. Raoul's hand went to Tomas's shoulder, and he pushed him forward as if the gesture could be a sacrament. The bridge held, barely. We ran the last yards with hearts like flints. We came to a valley rim the fourth morning and looked down. There, cradled like an accusation, sat a structure whose glass glinted like the eyes of a thing that had been sleeping and had not expected company. It was not a myth. The greenhouse existed in some form. Rows of pale tubes curled inside, and a low hum suggested pumps and motors deep within. A solar array, whole, not pieced together, caught light like a living thing. But there was more. The entrance was barricaded, the perimeter lined with stakes, and a flag had been planted that looked suspiciously like a warning rather than an invitation. We crouched at the rim and argued in whispers that smelled like a trial. The greenhouse could be salvation. It could be a trap. We could go to the door and knock like supplicants, or we could retreat and plan. Tomas wanted to make a dash for it with a small team and then come back with news. Raoul wanted to circle and attempt a night approach. I wanted to use the radio to call out, to speak to them from distance, to find a tone that said we came in goodwill and not as a swarm. There is pride in being the voice that brings others near, but also hubris. The choice hangs in the air like a voltage waiting to arc. Hope presses its weight on one side of the scale, duty on the other. Every step we take toward that coded door will change us. The world is tightening its net with glitch and theft and drought. The greenhouse is an answer or a question. We made our choice the way we always make dangerous choices. With too little sleep, with a small prayer, and with the stubborn belief that one more voice might be the key that keeps someone from walking into a fissure and not coming back. They called us cowardly for talking it out. They said the greenhouse would never open if we bickered. Maybe they were right, but talk saved lives that morning, or at least it gave us the chance to try. We chose the slow approach. I would speak through the transmitter from the rim and make clear we were not an armed party. Tomas and Raoul would descend the face and move toward the perimeter quietly, fingers ready on rope, while a smaller pair circled for a line of retreat. The greenhouse people, whoever they were, had windows that showed rows of pale tubing and the slow, clean blink of pumps. The solar array glittered like an accusation. The flag was a warning, sure, but it could also be a message in code we just hadn't learned. I keyed the mic and felt the old ritual, the hum, the intonation, the way you make your voice sound less like a man and more like a lifeline. "This is Miles at the radio," I said, and then gave the tacked-on names and the careful pause that meant permission to speak. "We come with seeds and hands. We are ill, but we carry no weapons beyond tools. If you hear us, respond with a single flash of light from the east gate. We will wait. Silence is a thing you can taste." It sat heavy on the rim and made my throat dry. Then a single light blinked in the lower east quadrant, slow, not a flare, deliberate. A small mercy. My chest unclenched somewhere behind the ribs. While Tomas moved with his rope and Raoul's boots crunched the rim, I kept talking. I told jokes that weren't funny, but that kept my hands from trembling. I read the weather in the kind of detail that made people think of mundane things. Wind north by 6, birds flying low, watch your step near the east marker. Practical phrases are prayers in times like that. They keep minds usable. We made it to the gate clean. A woman opened a hatch, pale and narrow-faced, and looked at us the way someone looks at an animal they have never trusted but depends on. Her eyes measured Tomas and Raoul as if they might be howled at later. She demanded a list of names, of the children left behind, of the medicines we carried. We gave them the list, and they gave us the look of people who ration kindness the way others ration water. We felt like supplicants until the air changed. Somewhere on the ridge, a movement traced the world in a way we'd been taught to dread. A line of dark figures moved like a single animal, practiced and efficient. Raiders. Not sloppy opportunists, efficient, patient, and feeding off the pattern the glitches made. They had learned to watch where the earth looked weakest, and to move when communities scattered to check their wells. When the first shout went up from a guard post to the north, the greenhouse people did something we had not expected. They went to the vents. "Shut the pumps," one of them ordered in a voice that was equal parts technician and priest. If the ground shifts, pressure will drive water like bullets. Cut the lines. It was a small technical decision, but in that moment it felt like a moral one. There are ways to keep a place if you can break what would kill you. We had of course brought tools. My hands knew the guts of pumps. Raoul and Tomas and I moved like surgeons with gravity as our enemy. We closed valves, lashed tanks to bedrock with straps and chains, wrapped flexible lines with spare lattice to prevent whip. I ran a quick check of the pump housings and found a hairline fracture on the output manifold, a brittle seam born of heat and long use. If that burst in a surge, the scalding torrent would become a weapon. And then the glitch came. It was not subtle. The ground heaved under our feet as if the world had gone into a seizure. An old oak across the valley that had once been a signpost folded like a person folding a jacket. A glass panel in the greenhouse gave a long, bone-sound crack, and the rows of plants shivered as the hum of pumps changed. The sky itself, always a bruise, pressed down and held us under it. Panic moves faster than reason in a storm. The raiders used it. They slid ropes down the south face and began to climb where the slope was weakest. Someone fired a flare because panic is contagious and light seems like safety. The flare painted the greenhouse, and the ridge the color of a wound. My radio was a living thing in my hands. I had to decide then, keep talking and risk the raiders tracking the frequency, or go silent and risk leaving the greenhouse's people to coordinate without the one advantage I carried. An outside line to other pockets of survivors who could come if they heard a draw of alarm. I thought of Sarah and the boy and all the small faces I'd tacked behind the transmitter. I thought of the ledger of favors and trust we had built. I thought of the man who had once left with a pack and never returned, and how many times I'd told myself I would do better if I ever had another chance. I chose to speak. "Listen," I said into the mic, my voice 2 parts calm, 1 part whatever steadies the hands. "This is Miles, to anyone within 3 days' reach. We have a cooperative site under attack at coordinates." I hesitated. Giving coordinates is like handing a map to a hungry beast. I thumbed back and said instead, "The greenhouse on the North Ridge hammered glass. If you can afford to move, move now. We need no weapons, only hands to help secure pumps and anchors. If you come from the east and avoid the northern pass." It was enough. It was too much. Within an hour, from places I had only ever heard on lonely nights, came shouts and the distant clatter of boots. A small convoy from Settlers Ridge, 3 trucks patched with sheet metal and hope, crested the horizon and began a slow, dangerous descent. Another group came on foot, faces covered, carrying coil and cable. They'd heard my call and they had chosen to answer. The raiders heard it too. They snarled and pushed harder at the south face, trying to force a breach before reinforcements arrived. The glitch compounded things. A fissure opened along the southern perimeter and sent a wave of gravel and dust that threw a man who had been watching into the dark. The greenhouse shuddered, and a cascade of droplets from a broken pipe turned into a small, angry stream that ran like a ribbon across the floor. It screamed in the mouths of the people who had no time to think. We became engineers and midwives and soldiers of rope. Tomas and Raoul ran and nodded and bled and cursed. The greenhouse people, who had seemed so wary, worked with us with the efficiency of people who had made peace with daily miracles and daily threats. They anchored tanks with the chains I had scarred with my vice. They leveled the pump housings. They lashed the cables to bedrock. Sweat and dust and oil mixed in the air. We sealed the cracked manifold with a sleeve of metal and a prayer. We wrapped the most vulnerable plant racks in a tarpaulin to keep debris out. The raiders made a push, and a firefight started in the slope below, shouting and the sharp, hollow sounds of impact. I kept speaking, relaying where help had arrived and where the raiders concentrated. My voice walked the line between comfort and command. I gave the settler trucks directions to a weakened ridge where they could anchor and throw lines across the gap. I told the foot party where to set up a staggered defense, how to use the broken panels as shields, how to avoid being funneled by a fissure. Each directive was small and technical, and it changed the geometry of the battle. It was like seeing puzzle pieces click into place. But there is always a cost. Fuel that should have been saved for weeks bled away in generator bursts as we needed to power pumps and lights. Batteries died and had to be swapped like currency. In the chaos, a raider cut a tether holding a water drum. It rolled and struck a guard, and the guard fell into the fissure with a scream that lit my teeth. I played a rhythm of instruction and confession into the mic. Anchor the tank now. Use the chain. Watch the ground. At one point, a young woman with hands too small for the task looked up at me and asked, blunt as a tool, "Why did you call them? Why not let us fend for ourselves?" I thought of Sarah's hand stirring soup and of the boy who had counted to 30. I thought of the ledger, of the nights when a single call had brought medicine from a town 3 days away. I thought of the tiny acts that had added up to our fragile network. "Because," I said, and my voice caught, "we are better when we answer. We lost 3 men that day. We saved many more than we lost. The greenhouse remained cracked, patched, and breathing like something stitched back together. The raiders retreated in the end, not because we were a stronger force, but because word had spread across valleys that other hands were coming. Prey is harder to take when the field is full of teeth. When the dust settled, I walked the rows with a tenderness I had not expected. Plants looked at me with the flat, green eyes of things that had not given up on light. A child from the greenhouse handed me a sprig of basil as if it were a crown. Tomas laughed, and then we tasted the scent, and it was like smelling a memory that did not belong to the burned world. But the cost was there. My generator's fuel tank had been bled dry to power pumps during the fights. The transmitter had run almost continuously. My hands were raw from not work. A sliver of glass scratched my forearm and needed dressing. More than that, the ledger in my head acquired new ink, names of the lost, decisions that had helped and ones that had hurt. The radio hummed in the evening like an exhausted animal. That night, after the fires were stamped out and the pumps were running again on jury-rigged power, I sat with a cup of water that tasted like survivor's guilt and spoke into the mic. I told listeners what had happened. I read the names of those who had died, because names are protests against erasure. I told them how the greenhouse had opened a gate to share seeds, and how they had agreed to teach techniques to our people if we helped maintain the pumps. I told them how the raiders had been pushed back and how for now there was a little more water in our world. Then I fell silent and let the static speak for the rest. In the hours after, alone on the rim, I heard something small and impossible. A whistle, faint and double-timed like a child's attempt to whistle with crows. I stopped breathing and listened until it faded into the valley. My hands shook. I did not know if it was real or memory. For a moment, I allowed it to be the thing I had been waiting for. A small, improbable sign that someone past had learned to find me. Climax is not always fireworks and finalities. Sometimes it is the awful calculus where you decide to speak and risk being hunted. And you do it anyway because the alternative is to be quiet and let others vanish into fissures and silence. We were bruised and we were lucky, and we had made a choice that would echo, people would learn. Seeds would be shared. Pumps would be kept. And my voice, wasted, hoarse, stubborn, would carry the story out into the dark where someone might one day answer not with a plea but with a plan. That night I slept for 3 hours, and when I woke the sun cut the glass of the greenhouse into shards of light. The sky was still a bruise, but somewhere in that hurt there was a green that did not belong to spectacle. It belonged to work. The dust settled in layers you could count by the length of a man's breath. It did not fall like a curtain pulled closed. It rose and rearranged itself into new shapes, a dune along the cracked road, a shading on the porch where someone had slept. After the storm and the gunfire and the ragged hours of fixing pumps, we did not wake into an answered prayer. We woke into the ordinary work of surviving the answer we had chosen. The immediate ledger is plain and bitter. We lost 3 people in the fighting, 2 from our little cluster and 1 from the convoy that came like a miracle and an expense. Names sit in my mouth like stones. Lewis, who had tried to bargain, who had once brought a jar of stewed peaches and made a joke about the way canned fruit tastes like childhood. His laugh is a notch in my memory now. Raoul, who came back hard-eyed and left softer in the places I had feared would harden, will never hammer another joint. And someone from Settlers Ridge, a young man with a scar on his chin who moved like he was always expecting the next thing to be a test, did not rise with the light. We buried them with the etiquette of the broken, a small pile of stones, a marked place on a map of the living, and our quiet. The greenhouse gave and took. It was not a treasure chest that emptied into our hands. It was a place with rules, and those rules were practical and strict. They gave us seeds, enough to begin teaching a few families to grow beyond jars and bottles. They taught Marta how to balance nutrient solutions on a scale rather than by eye. They showed us how to treat seedlings so that they could survive a week of errant heat without collapsing. They would, if we kept our end of the bargain, send an engineer every 6 weeks to help maintain pumps and to replace filters we could not fabricate ourselves. In return, we promised watch shifts, a court of labor, and the slow, boring, expensive work of guarding a water source in a world that has turned greed into a religion. The tangible outcome is measured in inches. A sprout coaxed into staying alive, a narrow hose lashed to a bedrock anchor, a timetable scribbled on plywood that says who tends which tray and when. It is not a revolution, it is a syllabus. But a syllabus matters when knowledge has been hoarded like medicine. Yet there is an ache that runs under those inches, the kind you get when you realize a decision cost you something essential. I had made the call on the radio to ask for help. That call brought hands, and it brought the raiders' attention to the valley. If the greenhouse had been a secluded sanctuary, we had woken it into a crossroads by asking for help. I replay that moment in the transmitter room, fingers on the mic as if I could pull the air back into the bottle and sip it again. There are nights the guilt is a constant hum, like the generator. Other nights it is a sharp, naked thing that wakes me. But guilt has occupied me before. I have held it next to the memory of Sarah's hand stirring soup, and found that the weight of guilt had company. Responsibility does not mean the absence of regret. It means the presence of choice. I had chosen to speak the coordinates, to invite reinforcements, to risk the valley. I had chosen because not speaking felt like a different kind of crime. Letting people fight alone, letting a seed bank stay shut because I feared the consequences of opening it. The ledger I keep is heavier now. It contains names and reasons and excuses that do not excuse. It keeps me honest. The camp reorganized after that. When people survive a pitched fight, they either shut down into tight, suspicious knots, or they open into new forms of trust. We tried the latter with effort. The settlers and the greenhouse engineers set up a joint maintenance rota. We created a small training program. A dozen people taught how to mend a pump, how to detect a hairline fracture before it becomes a shotgun. We started scheduled radio lessons. Twice a week, I translated technical jargon into plain language and read out schematics that the greenhouse engineers had scribbled for us. The first week, 3 people turned up. By the third week, 10 came, eager and ashamed of how little they knew and proud of what they could now do. Trust is still a brittle thing. We set new rules. No single person keeps the keys to the fuel. Batteries are logged openly. Someone from the greenhouse inspects our anchors monthly, and we inspect theirs. We established an emergency whistle code with redundancies. The raiders are still out there. They recalibrated after a loss and have become more cautious, more cruel in their timing. We added watch rotations and practiced false trails to confuse scouts. None of this makes the future safe. It makes it slightly less random. Nature in the valley is doing what it does when it can, experimenting. The greenhouse has created microclimates where baby plants drink in humidity and refuse to die. Basil smells like a memory we forgot to keep. When I crush a leaf and inhale, I can taste a kitchen that is not mine. Around the greenhouse, the soil is crusted with salt in places and forgiving in others. A line of green cuts through the brown like a promise written in a child's block letters. Beyond that line, the hills are still a bruise under the sun. The rivers, where they exist, move like reluctant ghosts. The trees are still withered in many places, but small shoots are stubborn where roots survive. The glitches did not end with the firefight. They come and go like weather. Some days violent, some days a petty annoyance. We mark them now with rituals. If a fissure opens in a new place, we send a team with ropes and poles to mark its edges and then tape instructions on nearby houses. Do not walk here. The children learn these routes as carefully as prayers. They learn to read the birds like old men read newspapers. The world is still untrustworthy underfoot, but we have become better at listening to its small betrayals. I have changed. The radio has made me a conduit of both consolation and command. It has made me responsible in the way a priest is responsible for confidences and absolutions. I used to be content as a mechanic of wires, a man who could fix a light switch and leave a home running. Now I am the keeper of 1,000 small urgencies, who needs antibiotics, who found a place with fresh water, who is moving through the dark and must not be met by raiders. The role has hollowed me in some places and filled me in others. My hands are lined with new scars. My sleep is shallow. My voice cracks in ways that do not heal with rest. But there is also a steadiness I did not expect. When a flurry of calls comes, my mind lines up tasks and offers them aloud like a conductor coaxing an orchestra. At night, when the generator purrs and the radio plays a loop of folk songs someone uploaded from an old storage drive, I think about what else could have been done. Perhaps there were other words that would have summoned help without calling the raiders. Perhaps I could have waited another night. These thoughts are the private currency of someone left to say the things aloud. I carry them and I spend them on small changes, a better code, a different route, a watch placed in an unexpected spot. Hope is not a single event. It does not arrive like a flood. It accumulates like condensation on a glass and then drips into a watering can. The greenhouse's seeds are a kind of hope. So are the people who learned to mend a pump and then taught the children. So is the fact that someone from 2 valleys away answered the call and came when danger lay between them and the place they left. A network of favors is not glamorous, but it is durable. It cannot make the sky blue again, but it can keep a village from being erased. There are practical tasks stacked ahead of us like unpainted doors. Fuel is low. We must ration more strictly and find alternative energy. The greenhouse needs more filters and a better plan for surge protection. If a glitch loosens the ground beneath a pump, we must not be at the mercy of a brittle manifold. We need to extend the lesson plan into other communities, to seed the knowledge into more hands. We must also prepare for the moral cost of growth. If the greenhouse becomes a center of plenty, who determines access? Already we fight quiet arguments about who gets the first allotments of seedlings. Power organizes itself quickly, and human nature does not need much temptation. At the edge of the new green, a child plants a basil sprig in a tin can and laughs because the soil is cold between her fingers. The sound of that laugh is a small sonic event in my life now. It is not a solution. It is, however, a fact that I can point to and say, with some measure of truth, something worth keeping exists. I read the names of the lost into the transmitter every week. It is a ritual that is both useless and essential. The act of speaking their names is a way to keep them from being swallowed by habit and dust. When I say them, somewhere a woman might hear and nod. Somewhere a child might ask who they were. Somewhere a person who can't write will hear a syllable that anchors their memory to a face. Names are a kind of repair. In the long run, I do not expect the world to reset. The sky will remain its bruise for years. Glitches will continue. Raiders will adapt. There will be hard winters and summers that test the stitches we make. But the choice we made to go, to call, to risk, has knitted a few more hands into the net. We have learned to teach and to accept teaching. We have a syllabus and a schedule and a small library of how-to notes folded into waterproof envelopes. We have a responsibility to protect what we have learned and to spread it like a light you pass along in a cave. When I close the transmitter for the night, I think of the boy who left with a backpack and never came back. I imagine him somewhere, older perhaps, with hands that know how to splice wires into a generator that still hums. I imagine Sarah's laugh somewhere as a sound with an echo. These imaginings are small rebellions against despair. Falling action is not a neat exhale. It is the slow, necessary folding of events into lessons. It is the way we plant seeds and watch them disagree with gravity and still insist on reaching for light. It is the choice to keep calling, even when the call might bring danger. We keep calling because someone answers, sometimes with food, sometimes with tools, sometimes with a laugh, sometimes with a truck patched together from other people's courage. We are not healed. We are patched. We are learning that patches can be durable. We are learning that in a world that shifts beneath your feet, the best thing you can make is a map not of land but of people, who will come when you call, who will teach you how to fix a pump, who will stand guard while you sleep. That map is inked in names, and I read it into the radio so that the places beyond our valley know not only where we are, but who we remember. The green is small, but it is ours for the moment. We tend it as if tending were prayer. And in tending, we tell ourselves that being alive is not enough. Being alive and passing along what you know might be the only real rescue. The world does not close with a neat bow. It never has. It keeps unspooling in ugly, miraculous ways. Fissures wiggle open. Raiders learn new tricks. The sky stays its bruised color, and we keep waking to do the small, stubborn work of staying alive. That is the simplest truth I can leave you with. Survival is work, relentless and unglamorous, and it asks for trade-offs you did not know you could make. In the weeks after the greenhouse fight, life tightened into routines that felt both sacred and boring. We scheduled watch rotations with the thoroughness of a liturgy. We ran training sessions until calloused hands passed their knowledge to others, and then passed it again. We rationed fuel like an old country that had learned to measure peace in teaspoons. The greenhouse taught us how to feed seedlings with nutrient solutions, how to splice a failing pump housing, how to anchor a tank so a glitch won't make it a weapon. Those lessons are practical miracles. They are not salvation, but they are the scaffold for something better than mere waiting. Hope, I learned, is not an event. It is an accumulation of small acts. It is the child who plants basil in a tin can and laughs when the soil feels cold between her fingers. It is the neighbor who gives up a shift so a mother can rest. It is the man from Settler's Ridge who drives an old truck 3 days through dust because he heard my voice ask for hands. These are not cinematic heroics. They are grit. They are the slow, unsexy machinery of rebuilding. Guilt remains my companion. I carry the names of the 3 we lost like coins in my pocket. Louis, Raoul, the young man from Settler's Ridge. Saying their names into the radio every week is both a habit and a protest, a refusal to let habit swallow them. Sometimes I imagine the boy who walked away years ago and did not return. I imagine him older, somewhere else, perhaps whistling with crows or learning to solder in a hospital with a generator that hums. Imagining is a small mercy. It lets me keep him alive in a world that would prefer forgetting. The glitches keep happening. They come in new permutations. A sudden pull that takes a shed, a bulge that slews a road into a black throat. We live by the routines that reduce risk, scouting trails twice a day, anchoring every heavy object we can, teaching children where not to step. We practice the whistle codes until they are muscle memory. These are not guarantees. They are an argument against randomness. We also learn to be honest about what we cannot do. The greenhouse is not a miracle factory. It cannot feed a continent. It can, however, teach technique and hold seed. We promise to guard it and to send teachers out into the valleys. We promise to trade labor for knowledge. Those promises were not romantic. They were pragmatic, the kind you sign with hands that know how to mend pumps and how to sew a sleeve to hold a leaking pipe. The world will keep asking of us. Winters will still be mean, summers merciless. Raiders will adapt. The political ghosts of governments will continue to fragment into small tyrannies and higher aims. We cannot pretend a single victory erased those forces. What we can do is grow a network of small patches, people who know how to fix what breaks, who answer a radio call at midnight, who show up with a coil of copper because someone else once showed up with a jar of boiled rice. If there is a lesson I have grown to trust, it is this: speak. Not because speeches solve problems, but because silence makes people vanish. A voice can call a convoy, coax a child to safety, tell a farmer where a fisher runs so he doesn't step into a trap. A voice can also be a ledger. You call names into the air and the living remember. When I speak, I carry responsibility. When I am silent, I carry a different kind of burden. I choose to speak. I have also learned to hold hope with both hands and to lock it down with practical measures. We are building a syllabus now: seed handling, pump maintenance, early warning signs for subsidence. We are training people to teach, which creates redundancy. We are building moats of knowledge around our green places so that if one falls, another might stand. It is tedious work, and it is everything. This is not to say I am without fear. I dream of the fissure that will open too near. I fear the raider pattern that learns to mimic our whistle codes. I fear the day when fuel runs to the last spoon and no one has a trick left. I fear my own tiredness, the moment when the voice cracks and cannot be steadied. But I have also learned that fear does not have to be paralysis. It can be an engine for preparation. So what do I ask of you if you are hearing this in a room with tired ears, or alone at a camp with a cold canteen? Keep a ledger. Teach someone what you know. Learn a new practical skill and pass it to a neighbor. When you hear a voice on the radio, respond, even if it is just to say, "I heard you." When someone reads a name into the air, repeat it. Names are small anchors against being lost. If you are able to travel, travel with a plan. Light loads, redundancy of ropes, scout before committing, avoid predictable routes. Anchor your heavy things. Build codes. Create a rotation. These are not just tips, they are lifelines. And for those who have power, a pump, a store, a guarded plot of green, hold it with humility. Power organizes itself quickly in scarcity. Decide now how you will share, how you will guard, how you will teach. Decide how you will resist becoming a center of extraction. Teach what you can before you need it. Knowledge moves faster than supplies. I will keep my generator humming until it dies, and then I will find another way to make noise. I will keep reading out names. I will keep the radio on a schedule. I will keep teaching and learning and patching, and asking for help when I must. I will mourn the lost and laugh at the small ways life insists on being beautiful, the smell of crushed basil, the sound of a child who learned to count, the absurdity of a tomato that refuses to die. There is no promise of tomorrow that I can sell you. The sky will likely remain its bruise for years yet. The ground will continue to misbehave, but we have found something worth shaping into resistance. A network of hands and a grammar of small, practical hope. It is fragile. It breaks. We repair it. If I have a last thing to say, the final lullaby of a man at his transmitter, it is this: stay loud enough for someone to find you. Keep a map of names, not just of places. Share what you know before you need it. Plant basil in a tin can and laugh when the soil is cold in your fingers. Speak when you can, because a single answered call once saved a valley. Hold the people around you with the same fierce care you give your tools. We are not finished. We are not faded. We are for now still here. Stay alive. Stay human.